It's time to take 10 minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.
Welcome to our discussion of Shavuot. What are we remembering? If we think about the idea of Shavuot, say, oh, what do you mean? What are we remembering on Shavuot? Remembering Sinai. Is there a mitzvah to remember Sinai? If you look in Parshat Vayetchanan in Devarim, it says, lest you forget that which you saw with your eyes. The day when you stood before God at Mount Chorev, at Mount Sinai, when I gathered everyone and I told them my words, so that they should fear me forever, and God, also their children, they should tell. So there seems to be this mitzvah to lest you forget this standing at Sinai. And in fact, the Ramban, in his counting of the 613 mitzvot, lists this mitzvah as a mitzvah not to forget, and also to teach your children about standing at Sinai. The Rambam does not list it as a mitzvah, and you can suggest that he thinks it's a mitzvah in the heart. You can suggest that he thinks you're trying to remember. We have to remember, we can't forget anything in the Torah, and one of the things we can't forget is Mount Sinai. But it's much bigger than just one mitzvah of remembering Mount Sinai. We shouldn't forget the whole Torah. It's part of that. There's an interesting interpretation of the Mishnah in Pirkei Avos. Says B'chol yom vayom baskol yotzis me'achorev u'machrezet v'omer oil elbonu shel Torah, that every day a voice comes from Mount Sinai and says, woe unto us is for the forgetfulness of Sinai. So apparently we're not supposed to forget Sinai, and Sinai laments the fact that we forget Sinai. We should remember, after all, one of the 13 principles of faith is that the Torah is that which is given to us, was given from Moshe Rabbeinu, and we need to know that, we need to believe that. But the question is that what Shavuot is all about? Are we really trying to remember Mount Sinai? Is that what it's all about? Now, if you look in the Torah, it's hard to discern. Shavuot is really a Chag HaBikurim, a holiday of first fruits, a holiday of the waving of the bread, a holiday of Katsir. Chag HaKatsir is a holiday of the reaping of the wheat. See the wheat season. It's the inaugural fruits in the Beis HaMikdash. The first time they used new wheat in the Beis HaMikdash, as opposed to barley, which started on Pesach. What really is it? So I'd like to suggest two things. Number one, this wonderful new sefer by Matan Friedman, friend of my son's, Ish Matan, he mentions that the Magen Avraham wonders, if there's a mitzvah of remembering Amalek, so we have a reading once a year to remember Amalek, Parsha Zachor. What's the reading to remember standing at Sinai? If you have to remember Amalek through reading the Torah, how do you remember Sinai by reading the Torah? He says, well, no, don't worry about it. You got Shavuos. Problem is, the Mishnah in Shavuos, the Mishnah in Megillah, the price of the outside source there, mentions that some people would just read Parshas Re'eh. They'd read about the different holidays. One of them, Chag HaShavuos, Chag Shavuos Taseh Lecha Shivat Yamim. Should make Chag Shavuos Taseh Lecha that you should Shiva Shavuos Tizparlach Mechel Chamesh B'Chama, that you should count 7 weeks. That's what we read. We read the Parshas Emor, the Parshas Amodim in Parshas Re'eh. We read in Devarim about the different holidays, including Shavuos, that you should count the Shavuos, count the weeks. So some people didn't read about Sinai on Shavuos. But the Gemara says, well, nowadays some people say that you should read about Sinai on Shavuos, and nowadays we have 2 days, so we flip it around. The one opinion was read from Re'eh, and the second opinion was read about Shavuos, about getting the Torah. And now that there are 2 days, we flip it around. We read about Shavuos, and then we read about the holiday of Shavuos in Parshas Re'eh. Why did we flip it? The main opinion was to read about the holiday of Shavuos. The second opinion was to read about the incident of Shavuos, the incident of receiving the Torah. Why did we flip it to the 6th day of Sivan? The first day of Shavuos is about Sinai. The second day is about Shavuos. Because, says Rashi. Rashi says because after all we got the Torah on the 6th day of Sivan. So you want to read about it on that day. So that actually on Shavuos, when we read about it, it's not just reading some story. We're reading about what happened on that day. And that explains why Ribatam Elyon, as the Rabbi Soloveitchik explains on when we have Parshas Yisro, when we're just reading chapter 20 in Exodus on that particular Shabbos of Yisro, so you can read it in any sort of way. But on Shavuos, we're trying to reenact Sinai, and that's why we stand, and that's why we read it as 10 dibros, as 10 sayings. We don't break it up by verses, we break it up by sayings. Shabbos discussion, which is very long, we turn it into one verse because it's one dibra, it's one of the 10 commandments, one of the 10 words of God. So where do we remember the Mount Sinai? One answer is we remember it by reading about Sinai on Shavuos. We have a special mitzvah to fulfill the mitzvah of what? Pen tishkacha devim shavru einecha. Lest you forget what you saw. The day that you stood at Mount Sinai. Remember the whole experience, not just the receiving the Torah, but the fear that we had on that day, the awe, the joy that we had in receiving the Torah. We should remember it. The Arizal says that every day when we say Avarabba, when we say the blessing before the Shema, we should say God loved us and He chose us and He gave us the Torah and He chose us and He brought us close to Him. We should think about Sinai, think about the mitzvah to remember Mount Sinai every single day. The Ari said it's good to say it after davening. According to Ramban, it's a mitzvah after all. Say it every day. You could read this verse from Vayet Hanan, lest you forget standing at Mount Sinai. And on Shavuos, when we read, one could argue that reading is to remember Mount Sinai. Shavuos is all about remembering Mount Sinai. I heard from Rabbi Menachem Lidzag, my teacher and friend who was here recently in Memphis. I believe he said the following. He says, you want to know what Shavuos is? Take a look in the Chumash. You open up there, and it's talking about Parshas Emor. It's talking about all the holidays. And then it's talking about Shavuos. And what does it say? So let's take a look. It says that you should declare on this day, the 50th day, you shouldn't do any work. Wherever you are, you should always do this. And when you're reaping, don't cut the corner of your field. Don't take the droppings of your reaping. You should give it to the poor and to the stranger. I'm Lord your God. Number one, this verse is almost a total rerun of a verse we had at the beginning of Parshat Kedoshim, the previous Parsha, telling us again that we should leave a corner of the field for the poor. We know that already. Secondly, we're not talking about the laws of reaping. We are in the Parshas Moedim. We're reading about the holidays. Why are you telling us how to reap? Comes from Rabbi Menachem Lidzag and says something great. He says, you know how we remember Mount Sinai? You don't remember Mount Sinai by reading about Mount Sinai. That's cute. That's nice. You know how you really remember Mount Sinai? You know how you remember the mitzvos? You remember the mitzvos by doing the mitzvos. If on the Chag Katzir, on the holiday of reaping, meaning that according to the rabbis, perhaps you reap during the week. In other words, Shavuos, the main day when you're not allowed to work, is the first day. Outside of Israel, we have 2 days. And then the next 6 days, you bring the sacrifices, because everyone can't bring the sacrifice of Shavuos on the same day, too many people. So you bring it for the next 6 days. On those days, you're allowed to reap. When you're reaping, on that time when you're bringing the sacrifice to the Beis HaMikdash and you're celebrating in Jerusalem, you're eating meat with your family, it's part of Shavuos. During that time, and you're reaping, or you go home and you reap, you know what you should do? Leave some for the poor. Don't embarrass them, just leave it there and let them come take it. That's how you commemorate. That's how you remember Sinai. How do we remember Sinai? What are we remembering? We're remembering not just that we got the Torah, we're remembering what the Torah is all about. That's why we read Rus. Rus reminds us, you know how to be a Jew? Be like Boaz. Somebody who gives all this wheat to somebody. Who wouldn't want to marry Boaz? Such a good man. He's leaving tons of wheat for this woman. And he leaves it for her like she could take it herself. One day he just took it, he was overwhelmed, he just threw a whole bundle on her. But generally, he just let her take it, be one of the workers. She can come take as much as she wants. This is how to live the Torah. Shavuos is not just about learning about the Torah, we emphasizing learning is important. Learning should be mishulav, it should be together with doing the Torah. Though we know how we remember the Torah, we remember it by doing it. So then we have two ways of remembering Mount Sinai. One is to read about it. One is to mention it every day, to think about it when we're talking about how much God loves us, how God chose us, how God gave us the Torah. One is to stand there and at the reading of the Torah and think about the story of getting the Torah, to try to recreate that in your mind as you receive the words of the Torah, the words of the Ten Commandments, as you hear them on Shavuot. The second way is to live it, to have a guest for Shavuot, to try to live the Torah every day of our life. As a matter of fact, the Rambam says there's no mitzvah to remember this Mount Sinai. It's a mitzvah to live it, do it. The whole package. That's how you remember Sinai. That's how, when the voice comes from Sinai and says, "Woe is unto us for the forgetfulness of the Torah," he's not telling you remember Sinai. Sinai is not so much an important event as in itself. In fact, it's not clear if it's a mitzvah. What's important is to do the Torah. When the Torah tells you not to forget Sinai, it means don't forget all the mitzvot. And then on Shavuot, we dedicate ourselves both to the actual incident of Sinai and also to the whole concept of Torah, which begins with chesed, kindness, and it ends with kindness. And in the middle, lots of other mitzvos. Do them, enjoy them. Have a great Shavuos. We thank the Woodman family and the Trisha for sponsoring our learning today. Thanks to Jason Lefkowitz. Thanks to all of you for joining us. Thank you.
This has been 10 Minutes for Torah with Rabbi Joel Finkelstein.